Hi folks, this is your favorite ComSci teacher, Matt Varghese, bringing you a video on how to set up Linux on a virtual machine for your development environment. In this video, we will set up a virtual machine on VirtualBox running Linux. We will use the Ubuntu MATE distribution for Linux. We will then install Visual Studio Code on that virtual machine. And we will do a quick C++ program to verify that everything is working correctly. Wait, the observant among you might already have noticed that I am running Linux on my laptop. So why do I need to set up a virtual machine? Well, most of you following along are using Windows or Mac OS, and so for you to use Linux, you have to use a virtual machine. There are a few other choices, but we will talk of those towards the end of this discussion. For now, we will go ahead with setting up a virtual machine. So you might ask, what is a virtual machine? A virtual machine is essentially a simulated computer run through software simulation inside your computer. So it's not real, as in it can be just deleted and it doesn't affect anything else on your computer, but it is real, as in you can use it just like another computer and do stuff on it. It's not pure simulation. Pure simulation is software, whereas virtualization does leverage some hardware capabilities that modern processors have, but those are the nitty-gritty details that we do not need to worry about right now. Why Linux? Well, Linux is the safest operating system you can get today. It's more efficient and less resource consuming than Windows or Mac OS or other options you have. It is free, but most importantly, it is the most configurable operating system you can get today. So it is best for all kinds of development projects, regardless of whether you're doing web development, embedded project development, whether you're using scripting languages or compile languages, all that kind of stuff. It doesn't matter. Okay, so let's get started. For installing all of this, you will need to first go to virtualbox.org and download VirtualBox for your operating system. You have choices for both Windows and Mac. Download whatever is appropriate for you and install it. I will not be covering the installation process for VirtualBox in this video. Then go to ubuntumate.org and download the Ubuntu installation ISO. We will be doing this on a 64-bit PC or Mac, but you also have ISO choices for other platforms here. We want to download the newest version rather than going for the long-term support version. The name makes it sound like you should go for the long-term support version, but this is for people running data centers and big web servers and things like that, where stability is extremely important, and something breaking because a new version of a certain package came out is not acceptable. For us, we are not running something mission critical like that, and in fact we want the newest version of everything so that we can be on the bleeding edge in our development. So we will go with that. You can download the ISO image using BitTorrent or whatever choices. Direct download will just download it like your usual web downloads. I have already downloaded this and it's sitting on my desktop. So we will start VirtualBox. Then we will create a new virtual machine. We will name it Ubuntu VM. Give it 2 GB of RAM. create a virtual hard disk. We want it to be dynamically allocated so that the entire space is not being taken up all the time. We will give the hard disk 20 gigabytes. Now you have a virtual computer set up, but you don't have any operating system on it yet. We do need to tweak a few settings before we install the operating system. We don't need a floppy drive. We can give this 2 processors. We can give it a little bit more display RAM and enable display acceleration. For storage, for the hard disk, we want to simulate a solid state drive so that installation and everything runs faster. And on the CD drive, we want to plug in the ISO image for the Ubuntu MATE installer that we just downloaded. It's on my desktop. I'm plugging it in here. Notice that it's this little tiny button. It's not very intuitive, I guess, but that's VirtualBox UI. You can choose to enable audio input. We don't need it for this exercise. We do want to leave the network adapter as NAT, and you want to make sure you have an active internet connection when you install Linux. This is because especially depending on the hardware, you might need drivers that Linux needs to reach out to the internet and download. So if that is not available, your installation might be missing drivers sometimes. It's usually not a problem, but better be safe than sorry. You can set up shared folders so that you can share files between your virtual machine and your base laptop. We won't do this for this exercise, but something you can play with later. So now, if we run our virtual machine, it will boot into the CD image for installing Ubuntu MATE. It's saying if we click the virtual machine, it'll capture the mouse, but we don't care about that. The right control key is how you can get the mouse out of the virtual machine when it is captured. We will shortly be given the option to either try a live distribution of Ubuntu running from the CD image or install Ubuntu. If you want to play with running Ubuntu without making any changes on a computer, you can use that. But for us, we are installing on a virtual machine, so we don't really care. Keyboard layout is English United States because that's where I am. We will choose a minimal installation, and we will choose not to download updates while installing. You can try the normal installation if you would like, and you will get all the Office software out of the box when you do that install. But we don't need that for this exercise, so I'm skipping that part to save time. You can choose to install third-party software. This includes some custom drivers and things like that, as well as codecs for video. But for us, for our exercises, we don't care about it, so we are leaving that unchecked. Here we are choosing to erase the entire hard disk. Remember, this is the virtual machine hard disk, not your laptop hard disk. And we don't want to deal with setting up partitions manually, so we'll choose this option. Continue. We are in Chicago, or in the Chicago time zone. Not a fan of the fact that it just changed the computer name when I changed the username, but oh well. I do like to leave the required password to login option as it is, but you can choose to log in automatically, especially since this is a virtual machine. You have to log into your laptop before you can get access to this virtual machine, and so it probably doesn't matter, but as a security practice, I just like to not log in automatically into computers. Now your installation has actually started. You have a splash screen where it's giving you a lot of information about Ubuntu, and you can choose to skim through these, have a cup of coffee, whatever. We will take a pause and we will come back once the installation is complete. Alright folks, the Ubuntu MATE setup is now complete and it is prompting us to restart the computer. The prompt tells us to remove the installation medium and press enter. However, we don't have a physical CD to remove. What you need to do is next time you power off this virtual machine, go into the settings and remove the ISO image that we linked to the CD drive. We cannot do that while the virtual machine is running. So we'll just press enter and restart the virtual machine. This time it'll boot into our installation because the boot order for the virtual machine by default is hard drive first and CD-ROM after that. So now here we are in the virtual machine, logging in for the very first time. Right away, we want to get a larger resolution. In my experience, on a 1080p display, 1440 by 900 works reasonably well. Keep this configuration. Next, we need to install Visual Studio Code on this virtual machine. We'll open Firefox and search for Visual Studio Code. Even though Visual Studio Code is made by Microsoft, it is an open source effort, and Microsoft has been a big contributor to the open source community. Visual Studio Code is by now become probably the best editor you can use for most of your recording projects, so we will use Visual Studio Code. We are running Ubuntu, so we need a Debian package. We will download that. We'll take a quick pause while the download completes. Our download has completed and it is in the downloads folder on our virtual machine. So we will open a terminal and install this package. The command to install the package is dpkg ---- install, but we need to run this as administrator, so we need to prefix it with sudo. That installs Visual Studio Code on our virtual machine. It takes a moment. Alright, Visual Studio Code is now installed on this virtual machine. So now we will make a projects folder, and inside of that we will make a test folder for our test C++ program. We'll start code in this folder. Yes, I trust the authors of this project folder because that is me. We can get rid of the getting started page. We will add a file named test.cpp, which will be our C++ test program. And I like to have a new line at the very end of all programs. Now we are ready to compile and try this program out. Visual Studio has a built-in terminal like some of the other old Linux programs like Kate or Eclipse, etc. Here we are being recommended to install C++ extensions. We'll ignore this for now. There's our test.cpp file. We are going to try to compile this. It says G++ not found. We can do sudo apt install G++, but we will actually instead do sudo apt install build essential. This is a package grouper that will install all the common development stuff that we need on this machine. Some of you might not have hit this error because sometimes Ubuntu installs with build essentials also, but in this case it did not, so we will install build essential. We'll come back to this when it's done. Okay, build essentials are installed, so let's try compiling our C++ program once again. There you go. We have the file compiled to .a.out. You can change the name if you specify an output parameter, but never mind. So let's try running it. And there you go, our first C++ project on a Linux virtual machine that we set up. So to recap, we set up a virtual machine on VirtualBox, installed Ubuntu MATE Linux distribution on it. We set up Visual Studio Code and did a quick C++ program to verify that everything is set up correctly. Now you can choose, instead of VirtualBox, you can choose VMware Workstation Player, which is an option that you have available on Windows, and it is a little more nicer feel for using it than VirtualBox. Also, you have many other distributions of Linux you could try. You can use Ubuntu native instead of the Mate. I like the Mate desktop environment, or there are plenty of other distributions. This is one of the flexibilities of Linux. You could also install Linux as a dual boot on your laptop and just run right on the base machine. Or you could get one of these guys, a Raspberry Pi 400 or a Raspberry Pi. These are tiny computers. If you've not come across them, they run Linux. Out of the box, they come with a Raspbian distribution, which I don't care all that much for, but you have Ubuntu MATE packages for Raspberry Pi, and these are 64-bit computers with 4 gigabytes to 8 gigabytes of RAM. So we can pretty much do everything that we did, including running Visual Studio Code on a Raspberry Pi. Well, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Hit the subscribe button, leave any comments for feedback that you may have, and see you on the next episode of Code with Matt.